So in to respect everyone's time, and thank you so very much, Bill and Oscar, for being able to make time for us, as you are very much in it, in the center of everything. And I just want to begin. If you guys could introduce yourselves, who you are and what you do. And yeah.
Which one?
Oh, whoever goes first. I guess Bill.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hector and Steve. We really appreciate the honor of being invited. I'm a senior professor, which means that I've retired from Fuller's Theological Seminary of Theology and Culture, although I'm still involved with PhD students, actually in the Philippines and in Kenya, as well as people in the US, although I'm mostly done with my students in the US. I just got off a 2-week intensive teaching in Manila, all of that through Zoom like this. So yeah, I'm used to this. So now I'm working on various projects. I'm on the editorial board of Regnum Press, where I review manuscripts. Also, I have a long-term project that I want to discuss with Oscar on modernism and modernization, and all of that, what that means. I think we still haven't solved that. I think we're still wrestling with that. So that's something I'm working on, and I hope to continue that conversation.
And Oscar.
Okay. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Excellent. Well, first of all, a word of explanation why I'm right here right now, not in my house, not in my usual setting of Zoom communication, but I was invited to an event. It's happening here in the LA area. On the memory of Berta Cáceres. Berta Cáceres was a Honduran environmentalist and activist who was murdered, was killed. Unfortunately, part of the whole story is that she was advocating for land, for indigenous communities in Honduras, and it was creating a lot of interruption to transnational companies, particularly from the Netherlands, the United States. And I regret that that's not a nice story for the US, because there's involvement at multiple levels. I'm here as part of the diaspora. So that's what I'm here, and it's sort of happened at the same time. Other than that, I'm very happy to be here and happy to be with Hector, with Steve, with Bill, and with the community that you belong over there in Tokyo and other places, perhaps, and to be able to simply engage in a subject that is both, as being a part of my theoretical contribution, but very much a practical contribution as well. It's both elements. I am currently teaching in the area of theology and Latinx studies at Fuller's, and I hold an administrative position, Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I'm a faculty and administrator, which means that I work 100% as an administrator and 100% of faculty. It's not 50. And in between meetings, in between conversations, in between teaching, life happens, and I have to write, do research, and do a lot of things. Most recently, I am involved in my contribution to probably the Latin American context and Spanish-speaking context. I'm right now involved in writing a multi-volume project called Nuevo Mundo Theology, New World Theology, which is pretty much uh, trying to articulate a theology that integrates the multiple stories, the multiple ways in which we do life, that we do theology, that we do religion, that we do culture in the context of the global South, and that takes into account the colonial era, the modern era, and what I call the post-pandemic era. So those three dimensions that are part of our journey here. And so I'm in volume 2 right now, which is a volume that speaks about the doctrine of the Bible, of the Scripture, and that's where I am right now. I'm writing this in Spanish, which is the language of my ministry, English language of my theology, because and so I'm having an interesting time speaking, and thinking and imagining, theology, people, ideas, in ways that I don't usually do when I am in the English language and imagining my art in English. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and Bill, for introducing yourselves. I have appreciated both of you through your work, this book, Theology Without Borders. It is a good textbook that has guided my thought and my ministry. And we've kind of, I don't know if you saw that we created a little snippet and heard stories from our own church. Tokyo Union Church is a very international, interdenominational context. So we heard people from different parts of the world, and now there are people from all over. We have people from China, Malaysia, Tokyo, people who've originated from various different locations, and people from Japan, people who are here who are Japanese. So with that, I want to hear your kind of update. So this was published in 2015, I believe. Yeah, 2015. And a lot of life has happened since 2015. 2015 has seems like very far long ago. Can you share about kind of any updates that you would have about the book? How Christianity, the conversation of global, this global Christian conversation, how has it changed in light of particularly COVID-19? And since the publish of your guys' co-written textbook.
Perhaps I can begin, and then I'm sure that Bill will engage. I don't know, Bill, and this is a conversation with you. We haven't talked about this very question, and with all of you colleagues through my feeling is that the kind of conversation we were doing, you and I, Bill, in Theology Without Borders, was anticipating some of the things that are happening. So the way I feel this is being unfolded is that several of the ideas and the approaches and even the terminologies that we develop in Theology Without Borders have been embodied, illustrated, and further extended by the events of the recent years. For example, I think the sort of a post-colonial, decolonial approach that we embrace there is becoming sort of a worldwide idiom. I mean, in multiple places. You go to Granada, you go to the Middle East, I'm going to be in Palestine. It's happening right there. So it's a language that is being used to to explain practices that are being that are happening right now to, to speak of other places, other voices, other forms of human existence, other way of doing several things, Christianity, even Buddhism, and other religion. So also the idea of locality is something that is right now, being illustrated in multiple ways. The border thinking, meaning the borders having a very important place in how we interpret, human rights, and the contributions of invisible communities. The insider, Jesus, and insider, roles of truth, beauty, and that Bill was very, adamant in including. I think it's all there, and the conversation of how culture, it's a horizon, where you do a lot of reality check, so to speak. I don't see that this is being obsolete. On the opposite, I see, for example, that people that want to understand what I'm doing right now, it would be good to start in Theology Without Borders. I mean, if they read that, my conversations with Bill, our conversation with multiple contexts, I think they will understand much better what I'm doing right now if they can go there. So I'll stop there.
Well, I would respond to that by maybe agreeing with it, of course, but challenging the fact that this has become a dominant discourse, because there's too many churches and Christians for whom this is not a dominant discourse, and in fact are opposed to discourses of this kind. I would say one of the things that's happened since we wrote our book is the sort of rise of American nationalism, which really wants to put a sort of stop to a global exchange that we are proposing. And I became so upset about that my recent book, The Facts on the Ground, starts by saying, the wisdom that I see happening in our culture in terms of taking care of the earth, taking care of immigrants, taking care of each other and forming communities of care, mutual caring, are things that in many ways my fellow evangelicals are actively opposing and simply resisting in many ways. I mean, I think I was reading today about evangelicals' response to Florida. DeSantis is what he's doing, where even caring for immigrants is weaponized and criminalized. So I see this as a very disturbing development, but I think I see it as a kind of theological malpractice, in the sense that it fails to see that God is at work in the whole global situation, and God is at work in people's concern for the environment, and God is at work among all the immigrants at the border that are seeking to make a better life for themselves. And we need to find ways to cooperate with God, what God is doing, rather than actually actively, in some respects, actively opposing it. Now, I shared this with my students in the Philippines 2 weeks ago when I was having my intensive, and they immediately responded because they understood, as you all know, probably, the Philippines just had an election in which there was a very similar kind of dynamic at work, in which the evangelical churches lined up on behalf of things that are clearly not part of the Christian gospel. So I see this as one of the dominant sort of thematics that we have to address in today. And I don't know if this means anything to you in Tokyo or not, but I would like, that's what I think.
Let me footnote something here. I guess that I would I don't think I'm going to contrast what you're saying, but I'm going to provide an alternative perspective. What if I say that what you're taking right now as a recent development is something that I have always felt as a minoritized scholar? As a minoritized scholar, I've always had a pushback from an evangelical center. I've always experienced that. So this is not new. You've seen a national phenomenon that for me is pretty familiar. So I don't see anything new more than we have political voices that have dimensionalized that have amplified that voice, and that have more politically responding. But be careful here. I think there's a dialectic implied. The reason we have this sort of a nationalistic, economic, push in the evangelical, sort of a national or religious push, almost fascist, is because there are on the ground voices like the one that we see in this book pressing forward. And so there is a danger. There is a voice that is disturbing the normative, political, I would say, privilege that has always favor a group of people. So I think this that you're seeing as the rise is more than anything else the realization that, okay, well, there are voices like the one we're representing in this book that are now more visible. So
Yeah, and with that, I imagine I could share a little bit that this is not a phenomenon only found in the United States, even though it's prevalent in the United States. Similar things are happening in Brazil, parts of Germany. The Philippines is also happening. There's a kind of rise of nationalism and using the particular religious tradition that people have, and focusing their aims for nationalistic ends. But with that, though, I want to make sure that we have adequate time for everyone here to, if they have a burning question to the authors, to these professors, to ask the question in light of the dialogue that they just presented, but also in course of the many weeks that we presented little snippets of the book. But I want to begin with that with a question from Pastor Steve, because you're here and Bill and Oscar, you have a follow-up question there.
I'm just so happy to see you guys again. I have missed you. I really don't right now. I'll keep. I mean, it is interesting to. I've been here for 3 years now, and so I've experienced the pandemic completely outside the U.S. So it was so interesting, Oscar, to hear you talk about post-pandemic, because it doesn't really feel like fully post-pandemic here, the way people live in the U.S. I'm curious what you mean by post-pandemic as one of these major like epoch-defining factors.
sure. I'm probably borrowing from Boaventura de Sousa Santos. He's an epistemologist from Portugal, who's a lawyer, professor of sociology and philosophy, and he argues that in every century, significant century, we have a beginning and an end. So he is arguing with several other intellectuals that the pandemic represents the beginning of the 21st century. And in a way, the collapse of certain systems and industries and ways of tolerating, certain injustices, or actually perpetuating some, and and the um, and the beginning of new forms of experimentation. For example, how the info capitalism is now the pretty much the standard. So the industrial society, in a way, is over in many places, and informational capitalism is huge. Intelligence, AI, technology, the algorithm, marketing, the whole thing is being defined. At the same time, the challenges uh, uh, of a hybrid and non-in-person, businesses, even religious life. So when I mean on a post-pandemic, it's mean that it's not that the pandemic has ended. It means that the pandemic came to solidify a new world. That's what I'm calling my series, New World. I mean, Nuevo Mundo Theology, New World Theology. There was a new world at the time of the conquest in 1492. There was sort of a new world where the political independence, and there is a new world right now. So I have a 3 episodes of the new world, and this is a new world, and that's what I mean by post-pandemic. It's not that we're done with the pandemic. It's that the pandemic is here to stay and redefine life for most of us.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
That's so, and thank you. That makes perfect sense of what you said. Yeah, thank you.
So here, does anyone else have questions in person here in Tokyo Union Church, or online in wherever you may find yourself? You could raise your hand, and I could call. Yes, John.
Hi, this is John Lilia. I have a question. So about this this new period we're entering, the new world period. What are some positive things that you think maybe have developed out of COVID? Maybe not all negative, but what are some positive things we should be watching for and kind of grasping on going forward that would be good for global Christianity?
Do you want me to answer, or go ahead, Bill? You take this one. I can go after.
Yeah, okay. I think one of the things that really was forced upon us in a certain sense was a new level of mutual caring, not only for us in communities and families, but governmental responsibility for their people. And I think there was a sort of new level of sense of caring. For example, some of the things that happened in caring for children in the US, which unfortunately has been discontinued, but for a while was cutting the level of child poverty by something like 50%, which was very, very encouraging. So that it was and I think what Oscar's pointing to is that this is an opportunity, a kind of global opportunity for us to have a new sense of what it means to be a human community and a global human community. I have to say, however, that with the war in Ukraine and the sort of new global polarization that's taking place, I see that as a major threat to all the things that are possible in this new world. And I don't know what we haven't talked about this, Oscar, but I don't know what you think about that. But I see a kind of militarization of the economy, the industry and the sector that's being privileged now is really the sector that's concerned with preparing for violence. And I think that's a real threat to the kind of things that I was talking about.
Benefits this what we're doing here. I mean, would be very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to imagine that we would have to do this meeting in this way and not to get each other and to exchange. So there is what or across the world that this post-pandemic has never people would relate at the same time that we have a more technical means to do this than before, because now all have to acquire
Oscar,
the kind of skills.
you're breaking up a little bit. We'd love to hear your response once the connection has been reestablished. Can we check if your mic, if your connection's okay again?
Do you hear me now, or
Yes, I think so.
do you hear me, or
We can hear you.
Disconnected.
You seem fine now. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay? Well, so I probably I'm not gonna repeat what I said, but what I'm trying to say is that the connectivity across context, like in meetings like this, is one of the new opportunities that we have. So to make, in a way, what you're saying, Bill, to make human relationship across more widely, because now space and matter are not a big obstacle. I mean, we lose something where we're not in person, but we can gain also other things. So the capacity to get to know each other and even relate, and even, here we go, and even join efforts and on projects of better humanity, better creation, better environment across the platforms. This is a good opportunity. The opportunity to learn what's your context, what are your struggles in ways that I would not before. That is really another opportunity in terms of the Ukraine, US, because it's Russia, US, right? At the end of the day, it's Russia. This is something that's scary and at the same time interesting. How are we going to see the right and the left of Europe demonstrating what do they have for humanity? This is a time where we're gonna have to, unfortunately, like always, it's gonna come with a cost. But the right and the left are going to prove what do they give and what do they take from humanity, and that's a time of observation and eventually judgment. So Putin says that this war for him is about existence, as Russia, as a civilization. Biden says it is about freedom. So go figure.
Yeah. Anyone else have a question?
I can ask one.
Yes, here you could. Yeah, please.
No, don't go.
Oh, okay. Oh, we can move the
Well, I
camera.
can move the camera, either way works.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Peter. So what's been on my mind first is, are you having a self-driving car? Is your driving driving there now? Hopefully he doesn't bump into something. But anyway, so my comment or question is, many groups, I hear many writers write about this new age, this new thing. I mean, and it's not new, right? Sean Gebser published in 1950 about the big change that's about to happen. But one thing that comes up in that discussion is always, from our perspective, we have a hard time to see what's new. And the value of finding those fragments where a new thing is already happening. Like you can look at the evangelical right in the US, but you can also look at the social justice movement that's a non-Christian new religion. And there's much good, also much bad in there. That's a counterpoint where new things are happening. And the value about writing about those things so that we can see. reading the book was very interesting because it opens the eyes. More examples or more projects about where new things are happening or things that have already been done, for me, are most helpful to see the new thing. Anything to say to that? Maybe.
Well,
no speculation.
if I could mention what I see as the new thing, what's really interesting is that now I don't know why I'm getting an echo all of a sudden. Are you hearing the echo? But what impressed me and sort of motivated me to write on my new book on the facts on the ground is the fact that really for the first time, really a majority of our population really are concerned to take the climate crisis seriously and to do something to care for the earth. That's always been, in my experience growing up anyway, a kind of minority position. But it isn't really any longer a minority position. I see that as something that's really a kind of bipartisan concern that we've got to take care of our environment. I think there's a concern that we really be willing to welcome immigrants. I think that's across the board a kind of concern. We're an aging population. We need labor. Our economy depends on it. I see that as something new. I think the response to the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court was a kind of concern for taking women's voices seriously in a way that we haven't done before. So I see these as new places where there's things that are happening that are really genuinely new. I may be wrong, but that's the way I see it. Oscar, I don't know what you think about that.
He just noted he has bad
do you-
reception. Oh, but we
Do
can
you
hear
hear?
you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna put my video will the voice to fully express, but I think yes, on the environment, on the land, as I think we're in a moment of negotiations. That was anticipated by several sociologists sometime, even at the end of the last century, that we were moving from total domination into revolution, and that we're now in a place of negotiation. Even in the Marxists or neo-Marxists, they cannot sustain that you have to break the whole system at once to be. No, we're really in a time of negotiation, and I think that's what's happening in more aspects of life, even in how you do church. For example, you're gonna have you can be church in multiple churches at the same time. You're rethinking some of the belief that you grew up with, and even not believing in the same way, and even acquiring more religious, interpersonal, even intercultural, perspectives and skills that you're adopting, because in negotiations you need all that. I think we're being forced into that space where we don't have things clearly defined, done for us, that you're going to learn a formula and things are going to simply happen. Now, you're going to have to trial and error. You're going to have a communal response. I mean, a contestation of sorts, almost in every aspect. And that goes even with the Gen Zs and the way the kids are being at home, taking over in leadership in multiple ways. and now feeling that, you know, the moment in which you can be more open, now you have to be a negotiator if you want to continue, life. So I think we're in that negotiating space, sort of in the midst of this, not at the beginning, in order not just to survive, but to thrive and to flourish. In this is a objective that I'm thinking that's happening in multiple spaces of life.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. Anyone else with a separate question, whether it be online or in person?
You're looking at me, it's-
Yeah.
I do have a question, but I want to wait for everyone else. Okay, I'll flip with you for a second, I'll come back. Hello, my name is Jonathan, and one of the questions that kind of came back up to me as we were discussing here is we've had the development of social media over the past couple of decades, and I think Pastor Steve and Pastor Hector will tell you that the community we have here at Tokyo Union Church is one where we really strive to at least listen and be able to share these kind of conversations, even if we don't agree with each other. We really strive to be united and grounded in Christ. But we know that in other, outside of these walls, there are many locations where that's not the case, where there is an echo chamber. There's this constant desire to be affirmed on what we want to hear, rather than trying to listen across situations where we don't agree with each other. And for global Christianity conversations to continue, it really requires us to be able to listen even to things that we may not agree. So as we reflect upon what was written in Theology Without Borders, what are some things that you would see in the near future on how our current dynamic is going to impact these conversations? Because if we're more likely to hear what we want to hear, rather than listening to the other voices, the voices of the oppressed, the voices of the minorities, that's going to really disturb that conversation. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I really appreciate, Jonathan, that question, because I think it's one of the things that we did not really address in the book, and I think it's one of the challenges that we face. There's two things that I would say about it, and this is an area that I've really thought a lot about, because it's theology and culture. This is what I do. I know Oscar has as well. So I think that what I would say, first of all, is that what we're seeing is a new form of the movement from word to image that has taken place over the last generation. And that has been a really important thing to watch. I think my colleague Rob Johnson, who's a film scholar, has pointed out that when he was in graduate school, literature carried the sort of cultural baggage. In other words, you would read the latest literature to find out what was going on in the culture. Then what happened was a switch from the word, and important, it's been called in culture the aesthetic turn, the turn to imagery. And that led to the rise of film and as an important carrier of cultural values. I think in many respects, we're in a change, and a kind of transition period in which that now has been transformed into kind of what we call sort of loosely social media, that has become a kind of important place where cultural, and I'll use Oscar's term, cultural negotiations are carried out. Now, I hear your worry about the echo chambers and so forth, but we need to remember that technology is always an instrument. It's an instrument that can be used for good or for evil. And Herbert Marcuse, who's somebody I'm just reading right now, has pointed out that when technology counters the life force or counters our human values, then it can become something that's evil, and I would say even can become demonic. But at the same time, it can be a force for good. It can be a place where that negotiation really happens. And I see the sort of a backlash against that kind of echo chamber that you mentioned. I may be overly optimistic about culture, but I think that Oscar's point about negotiation is something that could apply, first of all, to regulation of these platforms, but also insisting that they do make way for a real exchange of differences and a mutual learning.
Thank you.
I'm thinking that and what Bill said, and I'm gonna have to, like, this is getting real bad here, but the only thing I would add is, in line of what you're saying, moving from word to, let's remember that the word is a very, I mean, this logos-centric written world-based history and humanity is sort of a Hellenic, Western approach, where in other, in cultures, that the history of the world is now greater than the certain history of the world. Therefore, we have the opportunity to know the whole world in a different way, and that's why in this moment, I think we're presented with an opportunity to listen better or a little more to the places that we're not used to listen, because it was mediated through the written world, whatever history was, to the point that some civilizations were told that they had no history because they don't have a written alphabet in the same way that, so there were people with history, and so that's not longer the case. So in this new imaging multiverse in which we find ourselves, you have to also learn how through multiple ways and tell the story better, the whole story, the good story, the bad story, and you're being perceived, you're being decoded, you're being interpreted, and so you're exposed in ways that you have not exposed, because better than images will expose more of the reality surrounding you, even the emotions, the contextual, imaginative aspect, and eyes and the truth. So what I'm saying is that this is a time in which we'll have to learn how to interpret the stories and tell the stories in a more holistic, honest, and probably there we will find the fragmentation of humanity and the need of God and the grace of God. The fragmented that we are, the more evil that we are, the grace of God that can heal us. And let me, and I have to, and I'm sorry, enjoy this conversation.
So yeah, so my understanding then what Oscar is saying, and thank you to both of you for sharing that, is that one of the things that will help us, in addition to the bigger steps happening in terms of regulating the tech industry when it comes to helping out with the more technical side of things, is learning to better use the technology and improve the way we convey these stories, and being more creative in how we connect with others through the way we speak in order to be able to advance the dialogue. I guess that makes sense, because when it comes to even television production and things like that, compelling stories always draw people. And so I guess that's what Oscar's trying to say as well. Thank you. Go ahead.
I really like the way you put it, and it's very well said. I endorse that completely. And what you have said, and what Oscar is pointing to, is that there are really serious theological issues at stake in this domain and in this sector. And we need to address those as in very serious and thoughtful Christian ways. The problem is that very often we respond to something new in terms of how we deal with it spiritually. In other words, we spiritualize it. Well, we shouldn't, social media, we used to be, when I was growing up, movies were wrong, so because our spiritual life had to be pure, so we can't go to movies. And I see in some ways a response to social media a similar way, that the problem is a spiritual one. We've got to find our identity in God and all of that. Well, that's all true, and I wouldn't deny that for a minute. But there are also theological issues at stake in this conversation. God is present in all of culture, addressing people at every various levels, and therefore, when I always say that, look, we have in our courses at Fuller, we have people that Monday morning, they've got to go into the room and into the script writing room with their colleagues and write the next episode of the drama that they're working on. Well, they've got to do that as Christians. They've got to do something in that room. They don't just pray that something might happen that will change everything. No, they've got to decide, what dialogue am I going to put in the mouth of this character? And that has theological significance.
Mhm. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone online or anyone in person? These are great questions. Oscar is we just connect him because no one were able to connect. We still have Bill here. Any question? Pastor T, do you have another question in light of our conversation with Bill?
Oh, I'm really grateful, Bill, and admire how you and Oscar live out this concern the way, and you and Grace too. I really admire your wife's work. I love the way she is so immersed in Los Angeles, the city I love, and was actually just reading an article of hers recently. The chapter she wrote about Emmanuel, for an ethnographic look at the ministry at Emmanuel.
Yeah, let me just say, Steve, in response, when you mentioned Grace, she is to me a model of how you use social media. Her Facebook post, she has more than 800 friends, but that she turns down a lot of people because she wants to be involved in people's lives. She wants to encourage them. She doesn't just sit on the wall like a fly on the wall, which is what I would tend to do. But she wants to engage people and say, this, I want to congratulate you for doing this. I'm so grateful for that. And so I think that's the potential showing the ministry that one can have on social media. So I just wanted to mention, since you brought Grace up.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank you for inviting us, and Oscar and I are going to get together and we're going to have coffee after this, and you've given us an outline for maybe our next book. Who knows? You've raised the issues that we now we need to address those. Okay, so that's our assignment. So thank you.
Bill, have you had other churches use the book like this? And are you aware of other churches engaging in these questions?
I am not. Oscar, are you aware of any other?
I don't think he's with us, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think he's, I mean, I'm sure that other churches are addressing these
Yeah.
issues
Yeah.
in various ways.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, I wish more churches were, and seeing these as really theologically significant issues, and also really reflecting on the kind of purposes that God, I think, is calling the churches to do. I think you reflect at Tokyo Union Church a kind of archetypical contemporary situation where there are multiple, this is the multiverse that that Oscar was talking about earlier. You really do model that, and so you have a wonderful opportunity to as somebody said earlier, I think Jonathan, they wanted to really hear each other and spend a lot of time listening. And I think that should be characteristic of our theology and our theological stance, is listening.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think Jonathan described it very well. It really is a deep commitment here. And I'm sure there are other churches engaging this. I was curious. I'm just curious about, I was looking for conversation partners in this and looking for other places where they're wrestling with the same things. But I want to thank you for this resource. It's been great. I was really tickled when I was getting to know Pastor Hector, and he mentioned how important this book was to him. I said, "Oh, I know those guys. let's get them here."
We're grateful. We're grateful.
Yeah, well, thank you so very much for your time. If there's any other questions, I just appreciate the ability to connect again through the web and the new technologies that COVID and has allowed many churches to use and connect. So thank you so very much, Bill. We deeply appreciate every time that you've given us, and the words and the time that's spent to write this book and all your work that you do. So we're just very thankful and appreciate it. Yeah.
So can I ask it? So I know that there are people online too. So are your services hybrid? So they're in person and online, and how is that working? And what do you think the future of that is?
Yeah, that's a good.
I'm curious. I mean, that's a real question.
Yeah, I think the church has been has through COVID been committed to this digital. Some people would call the digital leg. So it's something that the church will want to stand on. Ultimate foundation is Christ and the unifying thing. But one of the things that we want to stand on is also this digital sphere. We have people who are joining us who only interact with us through the online, who are here now, joining us right here in synchronously. So we are so delighted that we are able to kind of be the church in the many expressions of the in-person expression, but also a digital expression that is different, but yet still tries to and is creating community and communicating the word of God in kind of different modalities, one would say. So we are committed to it. We want to continue moving forward, and it's a horizon that we are engaging together and traversing together, even new realities, new ways of thinking about how to engage online. So we're definitely still committed to it, but also in the active mode of experiments to figure out how we are going to engage with people through the online sphere.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Bill. We're very engaged in this question and trying to learn constantly. And we live with this tension where we've had, significant connections are made with people through the online experiences, classes, and the worship service who are distant from Tokyo. And they find very meaningful connections, and we're grateful for those connections. And often there are people who are in places where they want an English-speaking fellowship and study and worship life, and there may be very few English language opportunities in the area. But we wrestle with the tension between wanting to be available and not wanting to be a TV ministry where
Right.
people just only experience the two, and where we end up competing with local ministries where people live. So we're trying to figure out ways to work cooperatively with local ministries. I mean, for one example, we have a person in this class right now who's in Malaysia, who's very connected here, feels very connected here, also is connected with her church in Malaysia. And we're in conversation with the pastor there to figure out how to arrange baptism and joint membership, and because we don't want to be the temptation to not join your local church, but we also want to provide resources that may not be available in other places. So
Right.
It requires a lot of thinking,
Yeah.
ethical thinking, but it's been very rich.
Yeah, you're really trying to work in a very sensitive area where these two are not competitive, but rather cooperative and integrated in a certain sense. And I think that's a really important key to the future of this, if it can be pulled off. So I salute you. You're doing good work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate this. We hope that people who weren't able to join us will be able to join us or hear the conversation and the questions after the fact as it gets posted. So thank you so very much, Bill. We deeply appreciated of your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're really honored. We're grateful, and we pray God will bless you and continue to expand your ministry.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well, have a good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.